Hashem. Today's daf yomi is Zevachim daf chaf beis, and we will start on the bottom of 21b, 5 lines from the bottom. The Gemara is in our discussion of a kior, the basin where you're supposed to wash kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. The kohen had to wash his hands and legs before doing the avodah. So we had a statement from Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, who stated, Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina, Kol kior she'ein bo kedei kadesh arbas kol arba kohanim mimenu ein mekachin lo. Any kior, any basin, which does not have enough, enough water in it, or maybe it's not big enough, there's two ways to read it, to wash the hands and legs of 4 kohanim, you're not allowed to use it. Shenemar v'rachatzu mimenu Moshe v'Aaron ubanav. It says in the pasuk that Moshe, Aaron, and his children washed their hands and legs. So Moshe is 1, Aaron is 2, and his banav is 2 more. So that's how you get to 4. So Gemara says, let's challenge it. It's from a brisa. Meisvei says the brisa koa kelim mekadshin. You can use all utensils for kiddush yadayim v'raglayim. Bein sheyesh ben revius, whether they have a revius in them, or bein she'ein ben revius. Maybe they cannot contain a revius. A revius is 3.3 ounces approximately. So whether even they don't have a revius in them, boker tov, you can use them to wash your hands and legs. And so clearly, if there's not a revius in them, there's also not enough to wash for the kohanim of the hands and legs of 4 kohanim. We're on the top of 22a. The Gemara basically, so we have a contradiction, because Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina said that you have the kior that you need to be able to wash for 4 people, or else it's not good. But we have a brisa which says that the kior does not need a revius. It's only for netilas yadayim you need a revius. But with respect to washing your hands and legs, you don't need a revius. So how do we deal with this contradiction between the sources? So the Gemara says, well, first of all, I would just point out, it's not necessarily a contradiction. Rabbi Yossi bar Rabbi Chanina sounds like a Tana. And so therefore, it wouldn't be a contradiction. It wouldn't be a contradiction to be allowed to argue it. But if you say that he's not... but the Gemara wants to try and dovetail the sources. So the Gemara says, how do we deal with this contradiction? So Amar of Ada bar Ahava, Bikodeach besocho. No, we're talking about a cases, when can you wash the kiddush yadayim v'raglayim, even though it's less than revius, or in 2 lines from the top on 22a, when we'll take Rashi's explanation. Here is Bikodeach besocho. You drilled into the kior, why anybody would ever do that, and they put a small utensil there. And so basically the water was passing through the small utensil, and it's still okay. Rashi says, you drilled the wall of the basin. He put in a small utensil, and part of it was facing outward, and part of it was facing inward. And it was drawing the water from the kior and taking it out. But by its own, we would require something to have the shear of 4 kohanim. But if it's attached to the kior, it doesn't need it. Tosfos gives a different explanation. Tosfos says, no, that you took water from the kior and put it into a small utensil. And that's okay to use. Since it came from a larger utensil initially, you can now use it in this smaller utensil. So back to the Gemara. It says, how can you wash it from the small kli that's attached? V'hami menu. Torah says you have to wash from the kior, not from the small utensil attached to it. So the Gemara says, it says in the pasuk, yirchatzu. The cover of some mizbech yirchatzu. There's an extra word yirchatzu, they shall wash. L'rabos kli sharis. To say that you can really wash from any utensil that's been deemed sacred, doesn't have to be specifically the kior. Well, if that's the case, if you're going to add on from the word yirchatzu, well, any utensil. Why does it have to be specifically kli sharis? No, if it's not a sacred utensil, we wouldn't say you could wash from it. Mikal v'chomer mikano. From mikal v'chomer, from the kano, the kior, the basin has a kan, which is a base, which was hollow. and the kior sat on top of the base. Makano, just like the base, shenimshach imo, that was sanctified with the kior, was made holy. Eno mekadesh kli chol. Eno mekadesh, you cannot use it to wash your hands and legs. Kli chol she'eno nimshach imo, the regular utensil, which was not sanctified with the kli sharis, eno din she'eno mekadesh. For sure, you can't wash with it. Vikano mino, and how do we know you can't wash the hands and legs with the base of the basin with the kano? I'm telling you, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Yachliye kano mekadesh. I might think you can wash your hands and legs of the kohen with the kano. Kederach shakir mekadesh, just like you do with the basin itself. Tam Omer vasisa kior nechoshes vikano nechoshes. Ikashtiv nechoshes ikashtiv lo davracher. So they're only comparable in that they both come from copper. This concept that they both come from copper, we remember from the Rashi and the Torah that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to use the copper, and Hashem said, "No, you have to use the maros tzvaos." Moshe, in those days, the mirrors were copper, shiny copper. So Moshe Rabbeinu didn't want to use it because the women use it to beautify themselves. And Hashem said to Moshe, "No, this is the holiest," because when the men in Egypt didn't want to continue their families, their wives inspired them by looking in the mirror and using the mirror as a fortacious element. So the Gemara says, no, so he says, no, maybe you can't say, well, if you can't use the base of the basin to wash, you for sure can't use the kli chol, but maybe there's a distinction. The base of the basin is not made specifically to hold water in it, but another utensil is, so maybe you could use it. Ela mimenu lemiyute kli chol. So the Gemara says, so the word mimenu in the verse is excluding a kli chol, a non-sacred utensil. Well, if that's the case, yachi kli sharis nami. Well, if that's the case, the kli sharis also should be excluded. So the Gemara says, no, Rabbi Rahman Yerchotzer. No, the Torah added the word Yerchotzer. It teaches the kli sharis can be used. Umar Isa, well, why are we saying that you include a kli sharis and exclude a kli chol? The Gemara explains, no, the kli sharis at the end of the day was anointed with oil, and the kli chol was not anointed with oil. Says the Gemara, Amar Reish Lakish, Ko Amashlam Lamei Mikvah, Mashlam Lamei Kior. So anything, you had a question, Jeff? The kior was sanctified, but it wasn't intended to be holding water. And so since it wasn't sanctified and intended to be holding water, therefore you can't use it. So we know that a mikvah has to have 40 seah. That's a measurement that is a minimum measurement that a body can be fully immersed. And in order for a mikvah to be kosher, it has to be 40 seah of water. Also, a mikvah is required to have, generally speaking, a mikvah should have rainwater that was not drawn, so that was not held in a utensil. So what about let's say you get to 39 sah, can you add in other things to make it to 40 sah? So the Mishnah Mikvos tells us that there are certain things that you could add in to get it to 40 once you get to 39. And that is, and there the Mishnah explains it all. Rashi does, like, for example, snow or ice or whatever. Or different types of snow. But anyway, the Mishnah there lists it. But so now Reish Lakish teaches us a general principle, mikvah, anything that can be used to get us to the 47 mikvah, and it can also be included to get us to the measurement for mekior for the amount that you need to wash for kohanim. But but it will not be enough to get us to the revius, the 3.3 ounces that you need for netilas yadayim. What could be used for a kior to be mashlim and for a mikvah, but not for netilas yadayim? If it's to include this, the titanidok, which is something that like muddy water that can get the mikvah to the 40 sah, but it cannot get the revius for netilas yadayim. If that's what it's coming to include, what's the scenario? If a cow will bend down and drink from it, I feel revius nami, then it should even be included for the washing of the hands. Excuse me. The aim para and if a cow does not bend down and drink from it, I feel a mikvah nami masum, then it shouldn't even be included for mikvah. Excuse me. So the Gemara says, so maybe it's to exclude Yavkushin Adumim, that they could be used to be masham for the kior, but not for the washing of the hands, not for the revius. So what are these Yavkushin Adumim? So Rashi says that the Yavkushin Adumim basically are like water bugs. These are like water bugs that Rashi explains come in Yatushin, these little bugs below Kanafim, they have no wings. That they grow in the bottom of the barrels of our wine. Yavkushin Dakin Afe Nivram Rashi says they're created from the water. So they used to believe in something which we really know is not true today, which is called spontaneous generation. They used to have like barnacle geese also. They used to think that certain creatures, because they couldn't see microscopic creatures, and then all of a sudden they grew bigger, so they thought they grew in the water. So we know today that that's not accurate. But anyway, Rashi was telling us that the Gemara means that let's say you have these Yavkushin Adulim, these bugs, which then became pulverized, liquefied, that they could be used they could be used to be mashlim the kior, but not the revius of wine. The Gemara says, no, it can't be that. Yavkushin Adumin afilu beinao nami. They could be used. The whole mikvah could be made out of these little red bugs. Anything that comes from the water, you could immerse in it. Even if you have let's say a giant fish, and you took its eye and you basically turned it into fish oil, since it comes from the water, you could immerse in it. I mean, it sounds a little gross, but you could do it. So Amar Papa, so it's coming to exclude a different case. What's the category? The mute not on seya v'not al seya. Now let's say you have 40 seya of kosher water, and then you added another thing that would not typically be kosher. And then you remove the seya of kosher. So that's okay. So that you could use for the make kior, but you couldn't use it for washing your hands. Let's say you have a mikvah which has exactly 40 water, but not some seya. Then you put in an extra seya of something that's not good for a mikvah, but not al seya. And then you removed a seya of the kosher water. I raise the kosher, it's kosher. Up until the majority. You need to have, the majority needs to be kosher water. And Amar Papa, in Kadach Bo Revius, Rav Papa says that there are other circumstances that you could even do this with a revius, basically, where it would be okay also for Natilas Yadayim. So Rav Papa says, in Kadach Bo Revius, if in this mikvah, which is majority, even though Rish Lakish says that you can't allow the Revius in this case of not done 7, not done said, that's only with respect to Natilas Yadayim. But in the mikvah itself will be okay. So let's say basically you made a little hole in the mikvah where you could collect some water, you put in a small utensil there, then matbilin bo mechatin mitzinor. So this halacha of Rish Lakish that Rish Lakish said at the very beginning that it doesn't work to be mashlim for revius, that's only by washing the hands. But for the mikvah itself, you can use it to be immersing the mechatin and the tzinuras, these small little utensils. Since they initially came from the mikvah, they're still kosher. Amar of Yirmi Amar Shlakish may mikvah kesherim may kior. So now Shlakish teaches us another chiddush that the waters of the mikvah are kosher for the may kior. And they could be used for the basin water. Now we'll just take another introduction. There are basically three categories of water. There's mei she'uvin, drawn water, which you can't use for a mikvah; it's disqualified. There's mei geshamim, rainwater, which is basically what almost all of our mikvahs today are used from, and that's just rainwater that was not collected in a utensil, that was not drawn, and that's kosher. And then there's mei mayon, which is spring water, and that zav needs and certain circumstances are needed. It's called mayim chayim. So the mei geshamim, the rainwater, has to be still when you go in it. If it's flowing, it's a problem. You have to make sure it's not flowing. That's why some say you have to be very careful that the filter is off. So anyway, the filter can't be running because then it's flowing. But a mayim chayim, it can't even be flowing. Most of our mikvahs today are not made from spring water because you have to have an underground source, obviously, and it can be tricky. So says Reish Lakish, mikvah kshem will make kior. The mikvah water can be used for kior, for the basin. Lemeimer, do you mean to say to will mayim chayim nidhum? Doesn't this mean to say that the mikvah is not spring water, and so too the kior doesn't need to be spring water? It could even be make a shamim. Vatanya b'mayim v'lo b'yayim v'mayim v'lo mazot b'mayim v'rabo shar mayim. But then we have a brisa, and doesn't the brisa tell us that it says with respect to a carbon olah that the carbon olah, before you put the meat on and the limbs on the altar, it needs to be washed. It needs to be washed. It says in the pasuk, needs to be washed in water. And the brisa says in water will be yayin. It can't be washed in wine. B'mayim will be mozig. It has to be washed in water and not in diluted wine. B'mayim l'rabos shar mayim. It comes to include even water that was not kosher for mikvah, even drawn water, like standing water. The kal v'chomer will make kior, and for sure, kior. Excuse me, just the opposite. B'mayim l'rabo shar mayim. That you could even use any water for this, for the washing of the limbs of the olah, and including mikunasim, even like mikvah water. And this comes the kal v'chomer will make kior, and it comes to include us even the make kior. And what does it mean? Well, for sure, for the make kior, we're going to learn that from the make kior. My kal v'chomer will make kior. Lav demayim chayim. Meaning to say, what is the kal v'chomer that we're going to learn that the mei kior is kosher to wash the olah? Doesn't it mean because the mei kior comes from mayim chayim? And so since it's mayim chayim, for sure can wash the intestines of the olah before it goes up on the altar. And don't we see from here that the mei kior is not okay with the mei mikvah, like Reish Lakish was saying, but it needs to be mayim chayim. Gemara says no, that's not what it means. Well, it means you don't need mayim chayim likior. What does it mean? Kal v'chomer. Now you could use the mei kior, the kaddish, that it is sanctified. So since it was that it was placed in the klishares and it's holy, therefore for sure you can use it to wash the olah's limbs. Gemara says, wait 1 second. The fact that it was sanctified, you think is a milah? It's an added value. The Gemara says, the kadishe mal yusahi. You think that the fact that it's sanctified is a milah? But in the Beis Shmuel, mayim. What does it mean? What type of water? She'elam shem lavoy. You can only use water that doesn't have an adjective associated with it. It has to be just plain water. Yatsu make kior, but you can't use the water of the basin she'elam shem lavoy because they have an adjective associated with it because they're called make kior. Elolav. So what must it mean? The ru'uyin make kior. So therefore, you can't use the make kior for the washing of the limbs, but it has to be water that is capable to be used in the make kior. And not the make kior itself. And so therefore the Kal V'chomer is that if water, which is mekunasim, which is, just like still rainwater is kosher to wash it, for sure the mayim that's capable to be used for the mekior, which is the mayim chayim, for sure be used. Alma mayim chayim now. Doesn't this prove, not like Reish Lakish, that the water used for the mekior is the mayim chayim? Mar says Tanai, okay, it's a machokas Tanai, whether or not the mekior requires mayim chayim or any rainwater. Did Amar Rabbi Yochanan mekior, Rabbi Shmuel Omer mei mayim, Chachamim Omer shar mei mosein. No, it means any water, even rainwater can be used. And now the Gemara goes back to our discussion about an aro. We already had this discussion, and we had said in the Mishnah that an aro is disqualified to serve. And if he serves, his avoda, his service is disqualified. What's the source? We learned this from Ezekiel. It says, "Kol ben nechar arolev arobasar lo yavov mikdashi." Anybody who's a ben nechar, a foreigner, arolev, uncircumcised heart, an uncircumcised flesh, cannot come into my temple. We know in the Mechal Yavod, how do we know he disqualifies it? Because it says, "B'aviyachem b'nei nechar arlev." It says, "V'arlei barasar yopen mikdashi l'chalel espesi." When you bring the b'nei nechar, those are uncircumcised heart and uncircumcised flesh, into my temple to desecrate my house. Tan Rabbanan, ben nechar. When it says the ben nechar desecrates the service, I might think Yachol ben nechar mamash. I might think it refers to an actual goy, a non-Jew desecrates it, but not somebody who's just has the wrong thoughts. Tamomer arelev, an arelev, somebody who's an arelev will desecrate it. Somebody who has improper thoughts. Imkein ma tamomer ben nechar. Why is it called a ben nechar? Because his deeds have become foreign to our Father in heaven. Namely, aralev, aral basar minayin. How do I know if he's uncircumcised itself? Tamomer varel basar. And it says somebody's uncircumcised in the verse. It's richad. The ikas of Rahman aral basar. If it had just said the one is uncircumcised, mishum nemais, because that's repulsive. Because he has the foreskin of aralev do mais, but somebody who's an aralev is not necessarily looks repulsive. I might think he could do it. V'yashmin an aralev, and if it was the aralev, mishum ne'en libo shemayim, I would say that he is unable to do it because he doesn't have his heart to heaven. But someone who's uncircumcised and his heart is really to heaven, I might think he could do it. I might think he's not prohibited. This is a possible proof for Rashi, as the Gemara, as Rabbeinu Tam and Rashi argue throughout Shas. Whenever it says Aral, Tosfos here says Mefarish Rabbeinu Shlomo b'kol makom. Now Rashi throughout Shas that refers to somebody who might be a tzaddik, but his brothers died during circumcision, and so he's not allowed to do it, and so therefore he has a technical disqualification. And we see from here his libo could be to heaven, but Rabbeinu Tam says no, that person is a tzaddik. He can serve in the temple. It refers to somebody who intentionally decides not to circumcise. Tamei pasul, somebody who's tamei disqualifies the service. And so now the Gemara gets into the sugya called the Ziknei Darom, the elders of the south. This is a mysterious group. We're not even sure if they're Tanaim or Amorayim, who came up with an incredible chiddush here. Now we say that a tamei it disqualifies the service. So Amru Ziknei Darom, Moshanu El Tamei Sheretz. We know that there are different types of tama. One is Tamei Sheretz. You touch, let's say, a dead rodent. Then you have to immerse in the mikvah, and you, typically speaking, can serve a nightfall. But then there is a tamei mace, where you're tamei not till nightfall, but for 7 days, and you need the ashes of the red heifer. So it's a much more severe tumah. So the Ziknei Darom said this idea that that one who's tamei disqualifies the service. Well, Shanwell Tamei Sheret, that's only if you were Tamei from having touched a dead rodent, which is the lowest form of Tumah. About Tamei Mace, but if you touched a dead body, Mitoch Shemiratze Betzibor, Miratze Nami Biyachari. Zigni Darom came up with this tremendous chiddush. We know that if the whole community is Tamei Mace, then you're able to the Kohanim were able to bring the korban, and we know this from the korban Pesach that if everybody is tamei, and so therefore, since if you're tummy from a tummy mace, since the service would be good lichat chila, you can even initially bring the korban Pesach in a state of or any korban in a state where everybody is tamei, where the majority of people are tamei. If it's a communal offering, so too by an individual, if you did it, then it would be okay because the tzitz would say that the korban is not disqualified. So Ziknei Daram limit our Mishnah to say it's only talking about Thomas Sheret, but not Thomas Mace. So the Gemara says, "Ihachi Thomas Sheret Nami." Well, if that's the case, said the Gemara back to the Ziknei Daram, if that's the case, Thomas Sheret should also be okay. We should learn out from a Thomas Mace that it's okay because we should say. Ma tummy mace, just like the tummy mace, if you're tummy from that body, you need the ashes of the red heifer on day 3 and day 7, and still, if you served in a state of tummy mace, it will be okay. Mirat said tummy sheret, for sure tummy sheret, if you serve, should be okay. It's not disqualified. So Gemara says no. Kasavri Ziknei Daram, the Ziknei Daram introduced another chiddush. Mechaprin that the one who provide the atonement, i.e., the Kohanim, are like the ones who are being atoned for. The Kohen is like the community. So just like when the Kohanim were able to serve, it was only for Tumas Mace and not Tumas Sheret. So too, the Kohanim, when they're allowed to serve, when the korban is okay, it's only for the Tumas Mace and not for the Tumas Sheret. Ma miskaprin Tamei Mace in Sheretzlo. Just like when can you bring this in the state of ritual purity, only for Tumas Mace, but not Tumas Sheret. Av mechaprin, also the Kohanim, Tamei Mace in Tamei Sheretzlo. It's only good if it's for Tamei Mace, but not for Tamas Sheret. So the Gemara says, "My kasavri." What is this opinion of the Ziknei Daram? Kasavri, if they're of the position, ain't shochatim v'zorkin al Tamas Sheret. When it comes to the korban Pesach, you're saying you cannot bring the korban Pesach for an individual who's tamei from a sheret, even though he's going to be able to immerse and eat it that evening, because there's a position. Rashi reminds us in Pesachim who says that even though they'll be pure by the time they come to eat it, you still can't bring it out. That you still can't bring it now, even though they'll be purified later. So, if that's their position, so then why can the community not bring it for Tumah Sharet? We have this principle. Anything that an individual can bring, anything that an individual is pushed off and can't bring it, in this case, Tumah Sheret, Tzibur Avdi B'Tumah, the community can bring it. So it must be El Kasavri, Shochem V'Zarkin Al Tumah Sheret. So they must be in the position that you can bring the korban Pesach for somebody who's Tumah Sheret, who immersed, because by nightfall he'll be permitted. Amar Ula, Takalu Reish Lakish L'Deravim. Ula says Reish Lakish was, Taka means like struck or screaming. Taka here, Taka Rash says, Tzaklam Kol Gadol. He shouted. He was so upset by this introduction, this new idea of the Ziknei Daram. Chiyezek Koch Meruba, Koch Mechaprin, or Koch Miskaprin. Who has greater ability to push off the tumah, the one who are providing the atonement, i.e. the Kohanim, or the ones who are being atoned for, i.e. the Bnei Yisrael. That it's the Koach Miskaprin who have more power, because Rashi explains, as we're going to explain in the Gemara, an individual who is tummy from a sheret can still send his korban to the Azara, whereas the Kohen, if he became tummy from a sheret, is disqualified, because it says it's disqualified, and Ziknei Daram say it's talking about a sheret. The Bnei Yisrael have more authority to push it off. And if the non-Kohanim, the owners of the offering, became tummy from a sheret, mishalchin karbanos, saying they're still able to send their carbon shenit by misheret, enu maratz, and yet we say a kohen who became tamei from a sheret cannot it's disqualified. Makom shenitnu balim b'meis, a place where the Kohanim are tamei. A place where the balim, the owners are tamei from a dead body. She'em mishalchin karbanos, saying, and they're not able to send their carbon they're not able to send their carbon. Meaning to say, if it's an individual became tummy from a dead body, he can send his carbon pesach to the azara. He's pushed off the pesach sheni. Malcolm shenidmu ba'am b'meish she'em mishachan karbanos, saying that for sure kohen shenidmu b'meish eno din she'enu maratza. For sure, the kohen who's disqualified from a tum of a dead body it will be disqualified his service. So it's a whole question on the logic of the Ziknei Durham. Mar explained, no, because Savri Ziknei Durham, they're in the position, Tami Mace, Nami Mishalei Karbanos. No, he said, even if he's an individual and he's tummy from a dead body, he can still send his carbon. Mishalei Karbanos. Meaning to say, he's exempt from that. If this person became tummy from a dead body and he sent his carbon and they brought it from him, even though he can't eat from it, he still doesn't have to bring the Pesach Sheni. They say you don't need to eat from it. So the Torah says you're pushed off the Pesach Sheni. But if you did it, it's okay. The Gemara says, but doesn't it say that if you're tamei, you do it the next month? No, that's the mitzvah. That's just l'chatchila. That you have to be able to eat it. No, that's the mitzvah. And it's not required. But Tanya, that you can only slaughter the Pesach for somebody who's registered. I might think if you slaughter for somebody who is not registered, I might think that that'll be kosher. You just like you didn't do the ideal, but it's still kosher. So it says in the pasuk tachosu, and a cause of shanu avakim say no, it's no good. The iskish ochel l'menuyam, and we compare the ochel to menuyam. That just like you need to be registered in order for it to be kosher, you need to be able to eat it. The Gemara says zikni darm or makshi. They didn't have that. They didn't have that tradition. They didn't make the comparison. The Gemara says still the chilo makshi nami me'an nami yisupurchar. We have the question of Rish Lakish on the Kal V'chomer. Ma'be makshi nitvu balim. Misharet shemishalon karbanos elchatchil. Kohen shenitma b'sharet eno maratza. Makom shenitma balam b'meisha. Mishalon karbanos elchatchil. Kohen shenitma b'meisha eno din shena maratza. The Gemara leaves it unresolved. They have Rish Lakish's Kal V'chomer is so strong, and the Ziknei Durham have no response in our Gemara, and so the Gemara seemingly rejects the position of the Ziknei Durham. All right, that's today's daf. It's such a geshmak daf. Baruch Hashem.